This is Idiot with a Library Card, and on today's show I will be talking about The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. I'll start by saying I really like this book and the subsequent novels that follow. I'm not sure if I will be doing a show on the rest of them or any of them, but I would recommend reading them. The nice thing is after you read this one, you can kind of just pick them up as you find them. There's 5 books in the series, the first one being The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And that's the only one I think you really need to read to understand what's going on in the rest of the novel, because the story in all 5 novels are not very well developed. This one particularly has a very short narrative if you were to break it down by events, but there are a lot of bits in it. And what I mean by bits is comedy bits, jokes, and short kind of one-line jokes to overall chapter-long bits, like a comedian telling a longer joke. And so overall, about this book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I'll try to skip talking too much about the series and just the first book. The first third of this book is fine. It has some good bits, which I'll get into later, but it's sort of the weakest part of the book is the beginning. And again, if you're wondering why I keep using the word bits, it's the only thing I can really do to describe the little offshoots of the story and the sort of self-contained skits in the story. There are a lot of jokes in this book, but a lot of the jokes are self-contained within that joke or within that chapter or a short little soliloquy. And it's not an overarching joke that you need to read the rest of the book to get. You could sort of open up a chapter, read it, and probably get a sense for the joke or the bit or what Douglas Adams is trying to be funny with. So I'm going to use the word bits a lot in this podcast. So just be aware that when I mean bits, I mean sort of like Saturday Night Live skits, or if you've ever seen Mighty Python and the Holy Grail, all those side things that if you were to explain the story of Mighty Python and the Holy Grail, it would be a very short explanation. But then to describe each scene, which is loosely based on the plot, but not really, that's what happens a lot in this book. Is there are a lot of funny little stories or jokes, and they're not really part of the plot. They don't even really advance the plot very much. But they're funny, and it's the strongest part of this book. It's what makes this book so funny, is the little side streets it goes down. And I compare this book a little bit to A Confederacy of Dunces in how different it is, in that both books are comedy books. They make me laugh. But this book is kind of like an SNL episode with an overarching theme. Sometimes they'll do like SNL sports, and it feels more like that, where the jokes are galactic and spacey, where Confederacy of Dunces is more like a Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, where there are funny jokes in it, but the funniest part is what's happening to the characters and how the story comes together in a humorous ending. And as I'm praising this book, I do want to say there are some things I don't love about this book. I think I mentioned the storyline, and I'll get into that a little bit. The biggest problem for me, again, this book is very funny, it's not perfect. Generally, the 2 problems are that the characters are all very one note. There's sort of 5 main characters, and they all have like very simple motivations. It works for the story. You kind of want that, because what works about it is that you can put these people into different situations, and it doesn't need to be explained too much how they would react to the situation, because they're so two-dimensional. They don't really surprise you with their reaction to things. You'll occasionally get little snippets of character development, but for the most part, all 5 characters, all 5 of the main characters, sort of the crew on what the main ship of the story is called the Heart of Gold. Those 5 people are the main characters, and again, they're very two-dimensional. The book actually really starts getting good when those 5 are together. Once they're brought together on that ship, the Heart of Gold, the story really takes off, and all the side jokes and little entries in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy are super funny, and that's really when I think the story and sort of what Douglas Adams was trying to do it takes off. And this is the other problem with the book, is the story itself is weak. It's a very short story. It's a small novel anyway. It's not a very hard read, but it's a very short novel, and the fact that it's so few pages, and so few pages are used to push the story along, because a lot of the story is random things happening. That's kind of part of the charm of the story, is that every time they push this button in a ship to try to get away from a bad situation, random things happen, and that's sort of part of the joke. And what's nice about it is, what's nice about it for Douglas Adams, I'm sure, is that he can do whatever he wants. He can do whatever kind of funny jokes he wants to do, and either get back to the story, or if he's onto this vein of a giant whale being materialized in the air and then going through the whale's thoughts as it just comes into being and then falls to its death. It gives Douglas Adams a lot of freedom to be funny, and he definitely has a style of comedy, and it's a very British style of comedy, and he does it really well. There are a lot of funny parts in this book, but the story overall isn't funny. There isn't much there. It's just a very thin story that they then paste bits onto, little skits and jokes. It reminds me a lot, I just heard a discussion about a Weird Al movie called UHF, where Weird Al basically gets a television station and starts putting new kind of funny programming on it. And that's basically the story, and what Weird Al is able to do the story is then paste and tack a bunch of jokes and I'm going to keep saying bits that are really funny onto that really simple story. And this is the same way, where it's a very simple story that then gives Douglas Adams the freedom to tape and peg these jokes that don't have much to do with the actual story, don't push the story along, but are hilarious and totally just something that everyone should read, because I think most people would enjoy a good laugh, especially in these times. So to me, ultimately what this is the novelization of a really good stand-up hour. Like Dave Chappelle from DC, where there's sort of an overarching story, but there's a lot of jokes. And, Dave Chappelle, I know personally, we wore that DVD out in college, that Dave Chappelle live from DC. I think it was called Killing Them Softly. And this is sort of a really well done stand-up comedian's act, where there's a lot of jokes in there. And what I like is, like, really good stand-up comedians. I think Louis C.K. does this really well, where he'll tell a story, and the story's funny, like the short story, and then but while he's telling this funny story with a good punchline at the end, he slips in little jokes here and there. And when this book is at its best, and there's probably like 4 or 5 times where this book is it's like a perfect comedian act, where it's like a chapter or 2 chapters of sort of building to this final punchline, but while you're building to it, you rev up the comedy, and there are little laughs here and there, and then you hit the punchline perfectly, and it's so satisfying to read a perfectly crafted joke. And that's what this book is loosely tied together book of jokes. It's like you took a brilliant joke book, because most joke books are awful, but you found this is the most brilliant joke book, that then you just took the story and sort of sewed the jokes together. As I've talked about, one of the best examples of this is the ship they're flying on. The 5 characters are flying to a planet that doesn't want them there, so they fire nuclear missiles at the ship, and the ship's about to be hit by the missiles, but they push what's called the improbability drive, which it makes it possible to travel quite far in the universe very quickly. But when you push it, improbable things happen. So they pushed it. They actually don't go anywhere. They end up in the same spot that they were at. But the 2 nuclear missiles improbably turn into both a sperm whale and then a bowl of petunias. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a very well-written bit. It's almost a perfect bit, in that the next chapter after this happens describes the thoughts of the sperm whale as it is falling to its death. But it doesn't know it's falling to its death. It has just been born. So it has like these cognitive thoughts, and it starts naming things like, what's this stuff flying by me? I'll name it wind. It's a very funny and interesting writing style. It's very creative. And I don't want to ruin the joke, because the last bit of that chapter, because it's a short chapter, just the thoughts of the whale hits the ground, and then it's the thought of the bowl of petunias. And it's such a perfect joke that I don't want to say it, but when you read it, you're just like, oh, that's so good. And it's just like, again, it's like watching a great stand-up comedian, and you see him crafting a joke, and you think it's going to go one place, and then it makes that hard right turn, and it's just the funniest thing. So, again, I really love some of the jokes that are crafted in this book. And in the subsequent novels, there's a lot of really good crafted jokes. Again, the issue is the characters don't get any better or worse. They don't change throughout the novels, really. Trillian, the one woman on board the Heart of Gold, probably goes through the most significant changes from book 1 to book 5, but everyone else sort of stays the same. But what's nice is you then can just put them into different situations and craft these really elaborate, long story-type jokes with one-liners slipped in. And it's just Douglas Adams, what he did for himself is he set himself up with a universe in which he could do anything, and just anything funny that came to his mind, he's able to slip it into the story. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying that Douglas Adams isn't clever, or that he just set himself up to write dumb jokes, and that the story isn't good. The story has some messaging, but it's very surface level. Douglas Adams is famously a very staunch atheist who really doesn't like religion or religious. I shouldn't say he doesn't like religious people. He's never come out and said religious people are dumb, but he's very anti-religion. And that comes out in a few chapters in the book, but it's not hit you over the head, and it's not particularly nasty to religious people. So if you are a religious person, I personally am, you won't be offended by the book, and not even being offended, because I'm not someone who says, oh, you should read books that don't offend you. You should totally read books that do offend you, even comedy books. But what's nice about this is this book is very chill. It's very relaxed. You have to do some thinking, but for the most part, it doesn't really challenge you. It just makes you laugh. It's a funny book. It's a smart book, but it's not too smart to get the jokes. It's good for most levels of reader. I really enjoy these books. I think they're totally worth a read. And frankly, if you didn't want to read the sequels, you should at least pick this book up, because it's kind of an all-time, as far as I'm concerned. And the nice thing is, the sequels are basically very similar to the first book. So if you like the first book, if you like the jokes, if you find yourself laughing a lot, the next few books, you'll also find yourself basically doing the same thing, laughing a lot at these little skits and bits. I would recommend, though, if you're going to read multitudes of this book, put a book in between. Read the first one, and then maybe read something else and come back to it. You can always come back. Again, the story isn't so complicated that if you open it up one day to the Restaurant at the End of the Universe, which is the second book, you're not going to be lost if you took a year off from Douglas Adams. You'll click right back into who the characters are. And lastly, I want to recommend, if you have Audible, I didn't look it up, but I'm almost certain Audible has these. I know some of the local libraries around here do. The BBC dramatic readings of these books are really great. And if you're not into reading, or if you want something funny for, your car ride as an essential employee, looking at your mask being like, I'm going to have to wear this all stinking day, it's a great, light listen on your way to work or on your way home, especially in these kind of tough and scary times. I'm glad I did this. It was a really fun book to pick up and read. It's a really quick read. So if you're feeling down and a little scared right now, I would say pick up Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It has a nice message for when you feel out of control. It's probably the strongest message in the book. When life feels out of control, when the world feels out of control, maybe try to let go a little and laugh a little, and you might see things aren't as bad as you think. So thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. And I think I'm going to do a Jonathan Haidt book next, but who knows, maybe something else will tickle my fancy. All right, till next time.